Hello and welcome to Cruising Off Duty and this beautiful day in our harbor, which is where we spent most of our summer because of this problem. This is my transmission, which has failed us at the most inopportune time. Just as we're starting vacation, it completely lost propulsion, and I'll give you some tips of what I did to fix it and how hard or easy it was to get fixed. This is done, ready to put the second half on and ready to mount it back to the engine. Of course, fingers crossed, we still need to obviously test it by putting the engine in gear and making sure we have propulsion. But I'm going to give you all the things I've learned. Like, I'm not a mechanic, so I probably made a ton of mistakes. You learn as you go. I did have the help of a very friendly sailor here who was an ex-heavy machinery mechanic. He's retired now. And he said, well, I've worked on all sorts of machines. I'm sure we can figure it out. The reason was it is almost impossible to get a good transmission specialist to work on your boat in the middle of summer. It was July when we had this issue. So I'm going to talk about, A, what were the signs that it was going, if there are any warning signs so that you can look at it. What kind of, in hindsight, preventative maintenance I should have been doing to prevent this. It may have elongated its life another 5 years, maybe 10 years, who knows? Could have been, this boat might have gone defunct before the transmission if I'd kept up with some, maybe a little bit overkill, but preemptive oil changes in the transmission, which I didn't know we needed to do. But yeah, let's get to it. First thing you want to know is, what kind of signs do you have? What did we figure out? Our boat, fingers crossed again, our engine is a great engine. It's a Volvo Penta 30 horsepower engine. It has a Hearth HBW 100 transmission, which is what I just showed you. It has never given us the slightest bit of problem. It doesn't make any noise. It runs perfectly. So I didn't think there was much I needed to do other than change the oil and filter on the engine. I had looked at the transmission box before, but there's no dipstick. I gotta wait, there's always planes coming in. Pause. Yeah, our club happens to be right beside a municipal airport, usually small like Cessnas, but every once in a while a bigger plane like that comes in and they make a hell of a racket. Yeah, so what was I saying? Oh yeah, when it's mounted to the engine, you look at it, there's no dipstick, there's no nothing. There's all these bolts sticking out all over the place that's holding it together. This bolt head is just a bit bigger, and I didn't know what it was. I couldn't find anywhere to check the oil levels. And of course, once I had the problem, I actually researched it and found out this bolt is actually a dipstick. So although it just looked like every other bolt on this, that's what you got to do. You got to pull that out and look at the color. If it's red, you're great. If it's a little off red, maybe a little bit gray red, you're probably okay. But hey, transmission fluid is cheap. It's like $8 for a liter. And my transmission takes 0.35 liters. So we're talking about $3 or $4, which is way cheaper than fixing it. So what you got to do is pull it out. If it's perfectly red, you're fine. If it's a little off, getting towards the gray, then you're probably starting to wear your clutch plates, and the best thing to do is change your transmission fluid. What you do, just like your oil for your engine, is you suck it out. I have one of those 12-volt electric suckers that sucks out the oil and puts it into another container. I do that for my oil changes, and now I know I need to do that for my transmission. I'll probably, because it's so cheap, I'll probably just do it every year when I change my oil for my engine. Okay, so what signs were there that it was going? The sad thing is, there was probably no sign. I mean, in retrospect, there's probably a tiny sign. We couldn't get the speed I used to get. When I was at, let's say, 2,400 RPM, I would get 5 knots plus. And now I'm getting, in more recent times I'm finding I was getting high 4s, which is probably meaning my clutches were already starting to slip. Yet another plane going by, but it sounds like a Cessna, not nearly as distracting. So if you find the max speed of your engine for a set RPM starts to fall a bit, and you think, my first thought was maybe I'm dragging some weeds, or maybe my bottom's got a lot of zebra mussels on it or something, and therefore I'm just not going as fast as I used to go. But now that I've had my clutches burn out on me, I realized I was starting to slip. Not enough for you to notice, just maybe a quarter of a knot, half a knot, from what was your high speed for a certain RPM. Here's how it happened for us though. On our vacation, we started it. We left here. We went out, our first stop was Cape Vincent in the United States. Our plan was to circumnavigate Lake Ontario in a clockwise position. We start here from Kingston, go across. Our first stop was in the US city, Cape Vincent. We got over there, no problem at all. But then when we went to leave, we were going up the channel into the wind, and I'm like, it's not worth sailing in this tight channel. We'd have to tack like 50 times, you know, the usual thing, you know, it's just easier to throw the motor on. So we threw the motor on, and I was doing my 4.7 knots into the wind. And then all of a sudden, I noticed on Navionics, you have an ETA for your next destination, which was going to be Sackett's Harbor. And it said 6:30 p.m. I thought, that's fine. Plenty of daylight left, plenty of time to either get an anchorage spot or find a spot at the public dock. We're great. Then all of a sudden, as I'm going along, of course, the wind's blowing, so you hear the wind, you see the water kind of lapping by you. You don't notice your speed has fallen. I looked down at Navionics, I said my ETA to get there was 9:30 p.m. And I thought, what? So I rebooted Navionics, because I thought maybe it's glitching. Maybe it's not getting my right GPS location. Nope, it still said 9:30, and I'm like, what? And I looked down at my GPS speed, and I was like, I'm doing 2.7 knots. I said, oh crap, I must have run over a fishing net or something. I'm dragging something behind the boat. So I jammed it in reverse. Now here's the funny thing about these things. As I'll show you here, there are forward clutches and reverse clutches, and they are different. So you can wear out your forward ones most likely. Let's just assume this is forward. It might be this one, but let's assume this is forward. You could wear out your forward clutch plates, and your reverse ones will be immaculate, because how often do you really drive around in reverse? So I jammed it in reverse. Of course, lots of propulsion going backwards. So I'm thinking, I definitely must have dragged something, because my transmission is working fine. Go to put it back into drive after I'd done my little half circle to get rid of the weeds or whatever I'd run over. I put it back in drive, and my boat, which was going backwards, just sort of kept going backwards. And my wife's like, we're not going forward. And I'm like, yeah, and there's no thrust. I thought, oh no, we're stuck in neutral. Like, we only have reverse. But then after we sat there longer in reverse, I revved it more, of course, which in hindsight is doing more damage. Revved, still not going forward. Finally, it stopped going backwards, and we slowly went forward. We were doing about 2.5 knots. So I said, well, we must have something wrapped around our prop, right? Like plastic bags or something, and it's just affecting our forward propulsion. Turned around, we weren't very far, went back to the public dock we were at in Cape Vincent. Janice, she's the polar bear and doesn't mind the cold water, jumped under with a GoPro and looked at the propeller. There was nothing on it. So I was like, what the heck? Well, I said, let's test it again in this little bay. So I backed out of the slot spot because we were forward in. Backed out, no problem. Lots of thrust. Same thing. Put it in forward to go, and it's like we're in neutral. Like the boat slowly comes to a stop and then slowly goes forward. So then I'm like, oh crap. This sounds like a transmission issue. So I Googled it, sure enough. Clutch plates was probably the culprit, but it said change your transmission fluid. And I thought, geez, I haven't done that. I don't even know how to do it. So I had to find out, where do I get into it to even check the level and just check the quality and color. Found out about that bolt. Scootered, because we didn't have a car, we're in the States, took the electric scooter to some, like a dollar store, where I'd seen them earlier when we were there, and they had oil there. And there's all sorts of different car oils there on the shelf, which was surprising to me. Dollar General, it was called. And thought, well, maybe they have transmission fluid. I mean, who knows? Like, where else? It was a Sunday, so not much was open. Went back there, found the transmission fluid, the ATF, and lucky me, came back, sucked out the transmission fluid, put the new transmission fluid in. Wasn't 100% sure of the level, because that dipstick I showed you has a notch so close to the bottom, a little line, and that's it. And I'm like, is that the fill mark? That seems really low. So I put a little bit more in than that, because I was thinking I'd rather not have it be dry. Fired it up, tried to go around the bay again, exactly the same problem. Goes backwards perfectly, won't go forward. So we now knew it wasn't a fluid problem, although the fluid was pretty dark. When I drained it out, it looked like motor oil, which is not a good sign. So putting the new fluid in, and we thought, well, we can still do 2.5 knots. It's our vacation. We booked an entire month to do the circumnavigation. Can we live with 2.5 knots when we're motoring to get in and out of harbors and slips? And we thought, yeah, we still have reverse, 100% reverse. 2.5 is terribly slow, but not crazy slow. And we can sail most of the way. So we left Cape Vincent. Instead of motoring, we tacked all the way out. Yeah, Cape Vincent. And then we were heading to Sackett's Harbor. So we did the thing, sailing the entire way, which is sometimes less than optimal. Here comes no. Now we got trains going by. It's trains, planes, and automobiles around here. So we sailed all the way to Sackett's Harbor. Unfortunately, at night we had to anchor because they wouldn't let you stay at the public dock. And I had to anchor in crazy windy conditions. And that was the first time I got scared about my propulsion. Because, yeah, we motored out there. It was slow going. Into the wind, dropped the anchor, backed up on it. Then I thought, man, if we start dragging, am I going to have enough propulsion? Because there was a lee shore behind me. I'm like, crap. I never thought of that. What if we get in a real blow? So that was the first time I started thinking, maybe we need to cut our vacation short. We decided no, because vacation is a once a year thing for us to do this transit of Lake Ontario. So we decided we're going to sail all the way to Oswego. So we sailed the entire way to Oswego. Again, sometimes the wind was almost non-existent, and we had to literally, well, put the engine on and be doing like 2-ish knots. But then by the time we got to Oswego, we noticed now our max speed is not 2.5 knots, it's 1.5 knots. I'm like, oh, it's getting worse. So that was the first time we started to have a really serious discussion about, do we just call this short and head back to Kingston all the way across Lake Ontario? So we decided, yeah, we should, because the prevailing wind in the summer is from the southwest, and we were heading, well, west-southwest. So we were going to be heading into predominantly headwinds. And a few of the stops along the way, like one of our favorite places is Niagara-on-the-Lake. It has a huge current going into Lake Ontario. So we're like, we can't even motor against that current to get to a club. You know, there is a reciprocal club there, but we have to get into the Niagara River, which has like a 2.5 knot current. So we're like, oh, we can't get into anywhere where there's a current. We can't go anywhere into a harbor if the wind is on our nose. So the decision was pretty easy. We needed to sail back to Kingston and start working on getting it fixed. So I started calling around, trying to find mechanics that could come work on our boat in a really quick time so we could save our vacation. No luck. The usual mechanic who was around here was doing that sort of work had retired, and all the new people were like, well, I can take your transmission out, but I don't know how to rebuild one, so we're going to send it off to some guy in like Windsor, which is, you know, far, far away, and he'll ship it back, and it'll be our labor to take it out, his labor, which he was estimating at 2,000 Canadian dollars to rebuild the clutches, and then their time to ship it back, their time to come and reinstall it. I'm guessing it would have been at least $3,000 to fix it. And who knows when it would get fixed, right? Like everybody was on a, we'll get to it when we get to it. Even getting them to come look at it took days, and I was begging them, please just take a look at it just so I know what it is. Long and short, in the summertime, it's the worst time to try and get any sort of rebuild done. So either learn to do it yourself, or if you feel like you're having issues at the end of the season, take it out and do it in the off season when all these marine mechanics have plenty of spare time. So long and short, we decided we'll do it ourselves with the help of another sailor who's very knowledgeable. But now it was getting the parts. I called every Canadian transmission, mechanic and said, where would you get this kind of part? Nobody knew. The reason is this Hearth HBW 100, in fact, the whole Hearth line, I do not believe is even being made anymore. So you don't get a lot of support. You can find parts, but they were all from the States. It came in about a week or 10 days, which isn't too bad. But then it was still the problem of, do we even know how to fix this? So here's the thing. I'll give you the short and sweet. This comes out, you undo these bolts. This comes out as one chunk. This comes out as one chunk. All of the stuff on here is, well, of course it has to be very snug to the shaft. So all of this stuff is press fitted on, which means you can't just undo the bolt at the end and everything just slides off nice and easy by hand. You have to use what's called a puller. So this is a puller. You have to adjust it to be the right width to go around whatever piece you're trying to get off. And then you use this piece and you screw it down until it pulls the part off. Yeah, not something you and I, see, it's just filthy. Every time you touch anything, you get dirty. It's not something you and I would own. But once you pull off each one of these pieces, then of course you have all these parts, and you have to remember all these shims and little pieces have to go back in the same order that you took them off. So you've got to put them on a towel in the order you took them off to remind yourself. And then once you get it all off, you replace 7 on this side, 3 steel, 4 bronze. 3 steel, 4 bronze. All that comes as a kit. And then you put them all back on, and then it's all about getting them all back onto this with what's called press fitting them on. Now you can use a press, an actual hydraulic press, to squish them down, or do like we did, use this again and some other contraptions to just get wide enough around it that when you we put a steel bar on top of it and we tapped it with a hammer and tapped it down, and it did the job. So we're all back together now. I'll just put the other half on after I'm done recording, and we'll reinstall it in the motor, and hopefully everything works. So just to summarize, you're not going to get a lot of forewarning that you've got a problem with your transmission. Again, maybe in the last year or so, if you start to find that a certain RPM used to get you 5+ knots and now you're only getting 4.6 or 4.8, you were probably already starting to slip. Number 2, check your transmission fluid every time you do your oil. You're down there anyway. You might as well, now that you know how to get into it, pull the dipstick, look at the color. If it's anything but red, replace it. My manual says every 100 hours, which is crazy because I was told heavy equipment transmissions every 2,000 running hours. So I think the manufacturer Hearth was being aggressive with how quickly you replace it, but hey, if it keeps the thing running forever, I'll just keep spending that $4 in transmission fluid to replace it. Again, not that big a deal, just suck it out and put the new stuff in. The final suggestion, just to reiterate, don't leave your transmission in neutral when you're sailing. I used to do that because my manual did say when you're sailing, you can leave it in neutral, or you can put it in reverse if you want to lock your prop. I noticed I get about a half knot extra speed if I left it neutral, and since the manual didn't say not to do it, I thought, well, it's not hurting anything. But now that I've seen the insides and how things work, I now know that if your prop is spinning, this whole transmission is spinning. Now when it's in neutral, it'll be here, so none of the plates are being pressed against each other, but nonetheless, all the bronze plates are tied to this shaft. So if this shaft's spinning, those bronze plates are spinning, even if you're in neutral. And they're probably lightly touching against the steel plates. So I'm kind of surprised the manual even says to leave it in neutral. I've heard some people say they always leave it in reverse because there is damage you could be doing, and now I realize what they mean. So always put it in reverse if you're sailing. You'll lose a half a knot, but if it saves you rebuilding your transmission, you'll be glad you did. Yet another plane. Anyways, I learned a lot. Hopefully you learned something from watching this video. If so, show the channel some love by giving it a thumbs up. Subscribe if you haven't already. The next episode, I'm going to go through some of the things that we've done to this boat in the last year to make it a proper live-aboard boat. We're not living on it yet, but I retire in probably a little over a year and a half. And when we do, our plan is to take this boat down the St. Lawrence, out to East Coast Canada, down the Intercoastal, down to Florida, Bahamas and all that, live on it while we start searching for our next boat, which is going to be a catamaran. So what we've done is we've added a brand new fridge to replace our old Danfoss cold machine. It was from 1994 when this was built, and it was dying. Every year I nursed it back to health. This year I just couldn't. Got the paddles and nothing changed. So I couldn't get it to work, so we had to buy a brand new fridge. It's a Nova Cool. It's been working great. All this stuff I'm mentioning, I paid with my own money. None of this stuff will be sponsored. But I want to show you, after a couple of months of using it, what I've liked about the different things. So a brand new cold machine fridge. We bought, while our fridge was on the fritz, I bought a 12-volt fridge freezer. It's called a BougeRV. I'll show you maybe a picture of that. That's been a godsend. While our fridge was out of commission, we had that as a fridge, or you can turn it right up to be a freezer, and then there's another sub-compartment that's not refrigerated that gets the overflow cold, which can also be a fridge while you're using the bigger portion as a freezer. So that's been awesome. We changed our batteries to lithium iron phosphate from lead acid, and I'm telling you, if there's only one thing you can afford to do, change your batteries away from lead acid to lithium iron phosphate, especially if you've been thinking that you need more solar. If you're thinking, oh, my batteries are always running dead at night and I got to turn my fridge off and all that, that's what we were doing. If we got a cloudy, rainy day and we weren't getting a lot of solar, a lot of times in the evening we would have to shut our fridge off and let it sit cold all night and then turn it back on the next day when the sun came back up because we couldn't keep our batteries high enough. It wasn't that we didn't have enough solar, it's that we didn't have good enough batteries. Lithium iron phosphate can charge a lot faster, so when you do have sun, or you do have some sun anyway, even if it's overcast, your MPPT controller can put so much more power into a lithium iron phosphate. They also have a lifespan of like 4,000 charge cycles, which is way more than lead acid. The other thing is it just doesn't have that constant degradation. Even if you're not using it with lead acid, the volts are falling. You don't get that with the lithium. And my lithium, when it's full, is like 13.9 volts. And even with my lead acid, the best I ever saw was like 12.8 maybe. I never saw 13.8. So you start from a much higher level. So, you know, you're running your system as a 12 volt. So you have lots of fudge factor room before you're worried that your batteries are low. So with that change of battery, it just feels like we have double the amount of solar, which is amazing. Oh yeah, and the other thing, solar can charge your lithium iron phosphate battery way stronger. When you tell the MPPT controller that you've got a lithium iron phosphate or a sealed battery, it all of a sudden just says, oh, in that case, I can just throw the power into your battery, as opposed to with lead acid, it has to kind of slowly give the power so it doesn't boil off the water in the lead acid battery. So there you go. Then on top of that, because I didn't know that the lithium iron phosphate was going to be that great, I bought myself a external 100 watt fold out solar panel. So just add on top of what I already have on top of the Bimini. I haven't had to use that very much. It's been great when I have used it, like on cloudy days. Sometimes I just want to boost the batteries a bit, or I want to charge laptops and stuff. And so that's a time where I have pulled it out. So I've used it a few times. It's been great. And then the last thing is I got a small solar generator, they call it. It's called a generator. It doesn't actually turn on or generate anything. It's really just a lithium battery with an inverter built in. And then they call it a solar generator because it's designed with an MPPT controller in it. So you can just plug that external solar panel I was talking about right into the solar generator and use it as supplemental power. Or if you're a camper and you want to take it with you, you could take it to the campsite. It's a mobile inverter / lithium battery. It's very cool. So we've been very happy with that. So I'll do videos about that coming up after this. So hopefully you're looking forward to that. Until next time, this is Craig signing off, wishing you safe cruising, assuming you can. Okay, that's where the transmission comes out of. So that big flywheel looking thing is a damper plate. So when the gear gets engaged, there's a bit of a springiness to them, those springs in the middle. That stops it from being kind of a direct drive. And then the transmission goes here, that's right beside where the shaft is for the propeller. Well, the transmission's back in, installed, working great. In fact, my boat has never gone faster. I put it at a set 2400 RPM and I was doing like over 6 knots, which is unheard of with this boat. So maybe it was slightly slipping the whole time.